Welcome everyone to the main stage of No War 2021. You've made it. I apologize for the short delay in getting started. We've had a small change of schedule, but without further ado, it's my honor to welcome to the stage our opening performer, Elle Jones. Elle is an award-winning spoken word poet, an educator, a journalist, and a community activist living in African Nova Scotia. She was the 5th Poet Laureate of Halifax, and we could not think of a better way to open up this weekend-long conference than by inviting Elle to the stage. Welcome, Elle.
Thank you so much. Peace and solidarity, everybody. I'm speaking to you from the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Mi'kmaq people, governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1752 in Jabuktuk, also known as Halifax. I'm going to open with this poem, which is from every year we protest the war conference that they hold. So people from around the world come and plot war, and this is where this poem comes from. One sec. Read. Sorry, my partner's being really loud in the background, and I just have to tell him to stop. I'm sorry. Hang on one second. Okay. We built this city. We built this city on land we stole. Built this city. We built this city on land we stole. We built this city on Cornwallis and Britain. We built this city on colonialism. Built with Mi'kmaq land without permission. We built this city with ammunition. And now that it's risen, we build it on prisons. We're building off mental disease and addictions. No industry left, so we build on tourism. We're building a city of militarism. And off-record panels inside of the Westin by Western officials with global ambitions build with taxpayer dollars, but deny us admission. New defense minister building with McKay's traditions. We're building on rhetoric of change and transition while behind closed doors, it's the same old position. We build interventions and arms expeditions. We claim bombing campaigns are human rights propositions. We build up Trudeau, build with liberalism, same military, same wars, just new government edition. We build while Indigenous women go missing. They build over bagpipes and lobster dinners, and then they go home and build nuclear winter. We built this city on capitalism. We built TPP and free trade propositions. We build Walmarts to push out local competition, build cheap Chinese goods in sweatshop conditions. We built the economy, global acquisitions, send jobs offshore, unemployment decisions, used up all the coal, cut the trees, overfishing, build up the North End, Africville demolition. We're building off poverty, armed forces enlistment, can't get a job so you get a commission, build up the shipyards to Irving's conditions. Ships start here and we're building off wishing. Still building off Harper, although we dismissed him, we're gentrifying the projects on $300 billion. We're building the city on military missions, building weapons and warships to use on brown children. We build off the blood of Afghans and Libyans. We're building with drone strikes on Yemen and Syrians. Collateral damage, we take out civilians. We build global war over pipeline positions. We're building the city on carbon emissions. We're building a cycle of radicalism. We tortured Arar. Extraordinary rendition. We built occupations, just change definitions. We helped to build ISIS. Historical revision. We build Boko Haram to get oil from Nigerians. We build instability, build opposition. We destabilize the Mideast, societal demolition. We build arms trade with the Saudis, geopolitical divisions. We fight proxy wars by our allies' decision. We're one of the willing. We build coalitions with the US and NATO and Israel politicians. We help to build settlements, walls, and partitions. Build an open-air prison with Gaza for Palestinians. We're building in Africa, a new colonial mission. Built a security state from the war on terrorism. Cyber surveillance built by government technicians. We built a spy network, the new Inquisition. We're building a world where we all are suspicious. We're building 2 classes of Canadian citizens. We build Islamophobia and hate crimes commission. We build off a racist immigration point system. We build off the tattoo, military tradition. Lockheed Martin on campus helps bill our tuition. We say we're building new weapons to strike with precision. Building new drones with facial recognition. We're building an economy on death and attrition. We're building new treaties on nuclear fission. We build NGOs and we send in tacticians. We use foreign aid to build imperialism. We build occupations and call it assistance. We build cholera, refugee camps, malnutrition. We build piles of dead bodies and decomposition. We built a new world from 9/11 fruition. We're building this world off of war repetition. The theater of war is an endless audition. We built Al-Qaeda. We're building militias. We build retaliation, a cycle so vicious. New York, Beirut, Paris, Mali, and Garissa. Military strikes, just further ignition. We build global war, and there's no intermission. We're building ourselves out of human existence, and we're not bystanders. We're not on a mission, because don't you hear that radio transmission? Don't you remember? Take it back to the beginning. We built this city. We built this city on land we stole. Built this city. We built this city on land we stole. Thank you, everybody. I'm just going to do 2 more poems, and I'll keep going if my phone would let me. Oh my gosh, this performance there's problems being created. This next, sorry, I can't get my, this is like, nothing's worse than being on stage and then your technology is failing you. I'm sorry, I can't get this thing to do what I need it to do right now. The next poem is from, I wrote it about this, new economy of using diversity in order to prop up violence. So here we go. A woman's going to send the drones. So ready the covers of your Vogues. The food bank lines are now miles long, but a woman's the one who sends the bombs. Liberal feminism can't be wrong when a woman's the one who sends the bombs. Can't get workers PPE, but you go, girl Nancy Pelosi. All hail the bipartisan war parties. Now Trump is gone. We all agree George W. Bush has been redeemed. The war criminals are on our team, and there's a black woman on my TV screen. And when she bombs, I'll yell, "Slay, queen." We'll force your countries to be free, and little black girls can finally see themselves in drones and F-16s. And this is MLK Jr.'s dream, brought to you by Wall Street. Brought to you by the elites. Will never ever give you peace, fund military and police, but a woman could be commander-in-chief. See what can happen when you believe. This is gender equality, so everybody take a knee. The resistance heroes, hip, hip, hooray, the FBI and CIA, the generals and NSA, so please enjoy your new air base. We've all forgot Abu Ghraib, we all forgot Guantanamo Bay, and none of them will see The Hague, the Patriot Act, so yesterday. We're all in love with John McCain, make Lockheed Martin great again. Centrist neoliberals, all the rage, kids still living in a cage. The war party is here to stay, and let's lock Julian Assange away. We can't let him expose the truth. We're never bringing home the troops. Obama's so cool shooting hoops. You'll all be crushed under the boot. We're plotting out another coup. Billionaires we won't prosecute. We save that for moms of truant youth. Those Timberlands were looking cute. So let the oil companies pollute. Hell, put them in the cabinet. Add bankers to make up the set. We'll regulate the internet. Corporate news is all you'll get, but a woman's going to send the jets. Are you many women happy yet? This moment gives me all the feels. A woman's making weapons deals. A woman's making refugees. A woman's going to rob and steal. Last week, we were environmentalists, but now wars for oil are feminist. And history will reminisce how all the donors benefit. Orange man is out the door. Things can go back to how they were before. Biden voted for the Iraq war. How dare you ask for any more? Your kid's still super predators and his kid's on strike number 4, but prison's just for you and yours, and really the crime bill's all your fault. This is the time for unity. Bow down to oil and energy, and let's be friends with GOP and white suburban families. There's no more white supremacy. Black women deliver us the vote. We'll still be kneeling on your throat, but a woman's going to send the drone. So volunteer to work those phones so we can bomb some woman's home and probably waterboard her son. They're back in fashion, neocons. So 4 more years of settlements. The war parties are in agreement, and let's hashtag Black excellence. Kamala is vice president. The ladies join the gentlemen in sword, famine, wild beast, pestilence. The 4 horse persons of apocalypse. These days we call that feminist. Is this the dream of suffragettes? And I heard her bombs never miss. And don't forget to call her Ms. Madame, her honor, she or ma'am. Get ready those detainment camps. Muster the troops, line up the ranks. A woman's going to send the tanks. And all of us will give her thanks, especially weapons manufacturers, banks. And thanks to those suburban moms, a woman's going to send the bombs. I'm glad a woman is so strong to send our countries all those bombs. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to do one more poem. Really enjoy this conference. It's amazing that people are getting together and making sure to continue to challenge militarism and the growth of violence throughout our society. So I know there's a land acknowledgement coming up, and enjoy the rest of the conference. I know I can't hear you speaking along, but if you want to speak along in this poem, there's a refrain that you'll get throughout the poem, not one more drop, in the chorus, and you're welcome to share it as well. They say there's one rule for the few and another for the many. Trillions of dollars for the banks, and the poor get not a penny. And they've convinced us all that the crumbs they give are plenty, and that's why people in Alberta elected Jason Kenney. Well, that, and that they always have some brown folk as the enemy. When Indigenous people block the pipelines, they send the military, and there's lead all in the water. But is water necessary? And you can't even afford the plot in your family cemetery. But just blame the immigrants in the media commentary. They've got the white folk marching to save the job of millionaire Don Cherry. And whether we wear poppies got the white folk in a frenzy. And in the Toronto mayor election, the third place was a Nazi. They voted in Doug Ford because his brother seems so friendly, and they'll sell you dollar beers while your pension fund stays empty. Don't have any savings while your banker drives a Bentley, and they hold up billionaires as the people we should envy. Children in this country can't put breakfast in their belly. People on assistance can't even pay to ride the ferry. They make billions off the weapons that he used against Yemenis, but if you possess a gun, well, then the courts will give you 20. But when corporations violate, the government won't condemn them because there's one law for the people, but for the rich, the laws are bendy. And you end your life in debt and the burden is too heavy, so your kids go off to foreign countries where they end up buried. So to the killers at the top, not one more drop. Generals, guards, and cops, not one more drop. And they plunder, steal, and rob, and they strip us of our jobs, but we will not join their mob. Not one more drop. What? None more drop of poor and working class blood for their capitalistic wars. So they send the working class to die in wars they can't find in the atlas. Military surplus goes to cops who use black men as target practice. They keep the oil wells running, guarded by private military contractors, while the sanctions they impose killed millions of Iraqis. In their black site prisons, lords were tortured by their captors. But then they say that terrorism was caused by other factors. Military budget keeps exploding like a nuclear reactor while the livelihood of ordinary people broken into fractures. They'll offer luxury condos to the Toronto Raptors while the homeless on the street can't even find a benefactor. When WikiLeaks showed their war crimes, they imprisoned all the hackers and they fire all the athletes who tell us Black Lives Matter. But the war machine keeps rolling like wheat into a tractor. Hollywood propaganda, we've got snipers played by actors, and they tell us hope and change came with President Obama so that people vote again for their neoliberal masters. Don't even watch the news. It's all corporate paid chatter, all designed for you to serve your children on a platter. Slavery is a choice, says another foolish rapper, and now Amazon's invested so your doorbell is a tracker. Well, the workers are on food stamps and death row is getting blacker, preaching prosperity gospel so you're brainwashed by your pastor. Corporations making money after every environmental disaster. They send the UN troops to Haiti and spread cholera in the water. And so there's endless war and endless blood that splatters. Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia is all another chapter. And there's always some brown person that they'll say is the attacker, and every politician paid by corporate backers. So to the killers at the top, not one more drop. Generals, guards, and cops, not one more drop. And they plunder, steal, and rob. So they strip us of our jobs, but we will not join their mobs. Not one more drop. Not one more drop of poor and working class blood for their capitalistic wars. So now there's open slave markets because the US destroyed Libya. We took in a few thousand refugees and say we're saving Syria. Stoke the terrorism from Turkey to Nigeria, and now a military coup that's taking down Bolivia. They say they're white and Christian, so they cut indigenous insignia. Bolsonaro in Brazil kills black folk like it's just trivial. Canadian mining companies in the Amazon with private militia, rainforest burning, but we raise money for the Notre Dame Basilica because white supremacy is spreading across the globe like a bacteria. There's wars across the border between Pakistan and India. British colonial legacies left conflict in every arena, but they say that we're just savage and they talk of us as primitive. So Trump builds a border wall, just like the walls in Israel. Obama Obama used his drone strikes to send teenagers to oblivion. There's bases across the world from Japan to the Caribbean, and the powerful manipulate the people to be their useful idiots. Race and religion are their tools to show division. Populist politicians while rich folk rake in another billion. And the rich buy all the votes while the ballot box is filling, because the military-industrial complex always makes a killing. So to the killers at the top, not one more drop. Generals, guards, and cops, not one more drop. They can plunder, steal, and rob. They can strip us of our jobs, but we will not join their mobs. Not one more drop. Not one more drop of poor and working class blood for their capitalistic wars. Not one more drop of Black and working class blood for their imperialistic wars. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elle. I had shivers. What an incredibly powerful way to kick off this conference, to kick off the next 3 days. Right now, I'm trying to bring Shannon Chief up to the stage. Shannon, please click on the button to share your audio and video right now so that we can bring you up. We're really looking forward to hearing from you. Wonderful. So it's my honor to bring up to the stage Shannon Chief, a land defender from the Wolf Clan of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. To get us started in a good way, thank you so much, Shannon, and welcome.
I hope you can hear me. What I said was, my spirit name is White Polar Bear Woman. I am from the Wolf Clan. My clan are militant people, so this is why I take part in a lot of the land defending that goes on within the territory. Our people consist of clan families. Every clan has a responsibility to the land.
No, I'm so sorry, Shannon. I'm going to have to ask you to refresh your browser because we're not hearing you well. So maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll just share a little bit of tech info about the conference while you refresh and come back. And Greta can support you on the back end if you need some support. I want to make sure we can all hear you. So I'll share some other information, then we'll hear from you in a few minutes. All right, well, we'll make sure that we get Shannon Chief back. I know we all want to hear what she has to say. Maybe in the meanwhile, I'll just share a little bit of other information. My name is Rachel Small. I'm the Canada organizer with World Beyond War. Of course, I'm here welcoming you, and Shannon Chief was initially welcoming you because this conference was initially meant to take place in Ottawa, the capital of Canada, on unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. This conference, Nowhere 2021, was timed and located to coincide with, or you could say to crash, CANSEC, North America's biggest weapons expo. And we'll be hearing from several other people as part of this welcoming address who will briefly give some of that context and how this is, on one hand, several years in the making, this conference. On the other hand, decades in the making in terms of the broader resistance and determination to shut down these weapons expos in solidarity with the people who've been impacted by the weapons they sell. I'll take a minute now just to first thank all of our endorsing and sponsoring organizations. This conference would not be possible without you. Thank you so much for your support. The full list of endorsers and sponsors is in the event program, and it's on the reception page. And many also have expo booths, so you can visit throughout this whole conference. We're so grateful to all of you for your support. And even more so, we're so proud to be part of broader movements with you. as part of our anti-war work, as part of our broader work for peace and justice. And thank you all so much to all of you who are joining us live right now. We knew this would be a tricky platform. We knew we would run into hiccups. We know it's a new platform for the vast majority of us here, and we so appreciate you taking the time to experiment with it and learn with us. We didn't want to do a webinar in place of our annual in-person conference. We wanted to do something that let us come together and meet each other and make the types of connections that support anti-war mobilization around the world. And so that's why we're using this new platform. And over the next few days, we'll all become experts in it. Maybe I'll just quickly highlight so you feel oriented for the rest of today and tomorrow, that the buttons on the left side of the screen that you see right now beside my face, those are the main ways that you'll navigate around this conference. You'll see they say reception, stage, sessions, networking, and expo. They light up with now or live to indicate what's happening right now. That's why you see a live button next to the stage where we are right now. The full schedule can always be found throughout the conference at the reception page. Don't click it now or you'll leave here and go to the reception, but that's where you will click if you ever feel lost or if you want to go to the schedule and see what's happening right now. We also have set up a help desk booth to help with any tech issues throughout the conference. Not right now, but later if you want to check that out or if you run into issues, feel free to click the Expo booth button on the left side, and then you'll select the Help Desk booth. And beside it, you'll see many of our other sponsors and partners booths. Also wanted to make sure all of you are aware of the chat function. You'll see on the right side of your screen that there's an event tab as well as a stage tab. If you click on stage and then you click on chat, that's the chat area for everyone who's sitting here watching me speak on this stage right now. The chat that's under event tab, so on the top there, event, and then chat, that's the chat for the full conference. So at any time, if you type in that chat, the several hundred people who are in this conference will all see. Usually you'll probably want to use the chat box for the particular workshop or booth or stage that you're sitting at. I also wanted to let people know that if you're ever lost or if you leave or aren't sure when you're joining tomorrow where to go, we did send out a PDF brochure or a pamphlet, program, I should say, for this whole conference. And within it are links to all the different sessions and panels. So if you are at the time when you want to go to a particular thing, you can also just click on the link in your pamphlet to get there. All right, so if Shannon is available to come back on, I'd love to bring you back on now. If you'd like to click the share audio and video button, Shannon. If not, we'll make sure to come back to you a little bit later. Okay, well, maybe we will move forward with the next part of our schedule, and then we'll come back to Shannon. I'm so sorry, Shannon, that you were interrupted in that way. That's so unfortunate. But we will come back to you. As I alluded to earlier, very briefly, this has been a multi-year saga of so many organizations and groups who have been involved in the planning to confront CANSEC and to plan initially the No War 2020 and now the No War 2021 conference. So I'm very pleased now to bring up a few speakers who will briefly share some of that context and introduce the organizations that have been involved in this for years. This way we can really understand what we're part of here today in its broader context. So first, I'm gonna call up Richard Sanders. Richard is a researcher, a writer, and activist who has been a pillar in the peace movement for many decades. He was the coordinator of the Ottawa Peace Resource Center, produced a community anti-war radio program for almost 20 years. He was an organizer with the Alliance for Nonviolent Action, which notably culminated in the arrest of 150 people at Armex 89. Armex 89 was the predecessor of the CANSEC Weapons Expo that was to take place in Ottawa this weekend. He founded the Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade, whose initial campaign, in fact, brought about Ottawa's 20-year ban on arms bazaars. Welcome, Richard, and thanks for joining us to lead us off with some history of this resistance to CANSEC. Welcome.
Oh, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Everything's
Go ahead.
good?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, I'm speaking to you from Ottawa. I was brought here by war veterans and my parents who became peace activists in the early 1950s. So I come from a previous generation of activist types, and because of them, really, in a large part, I was inspired to get involved in the peace movement. And I've been working full time in the anti-war movement since 1984. When I graduated, I was studying anthropology, cultural anthropology at university. Anyway, in 1988, late 1988, I founded the Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade. And our first campaign, as was you just heard, was to expose Canada's biggest arms bazaar, which was called Armex, and it was the. And as a result, the city of Ottawa banned all future arms shows on municipal property, at least, and that, which is where they were holding Armex, and the ban lasted for 20 years. So that was a great success. We had thousands of people protesting in the streets against Armex, marched through Ottawa, and as you just heard, 150 people were arrested. We blockaded the 5 gates, the 5 entryways into Armex. My mom and I were both arrested there. So that was by the Alliance for Nonviolent Action, that civil disobedience, and I think it was the largest mass arrest in Ottawa, certainly, but maybe even in Canada. I'm not sure. I've never heard of another case that was that big. We didn't organize anything that big previously. Anyway, the NDP used my research into Armex to hold a full-day debate in the House of Commons about Armex and Canada's role in the arms trade. So that was great. And then there were hundreds of news stories, and literally millions of people learned about Canada's role in the international arms trade because of what we did around Armex. It was just such a blatant symbol, a manifestation of the Canadian weapons trade that it caught people's attention. I don't think anyone had ever really protested an arms bazaar before in Canada. But all the details about that are all on the COAT website, so people can go there and see it. It's coat.ncf.ca. In 1990, I started COAT's magazine, which is called Press for Conversion, and for the first 10 years, the magazine focused on economic conversion of military industries and bases to socially useful and environmentally sound alternatives. And issue number 70 of our magazine is now at the printer, finally, and it's on, I've got a copy of it here. You see that? Anyway, so little product placement. This issue is about East European emigre groups in Canada that were founded and led during the Cold War by Nazi collaborators, SS veterans, Holocaust perpetrators, CIA assets, and all sorts of other nefarious fascist supporting people. And they founded these major organizations that still exist, represent the emigre groups, East European emigre groups in Canada, and have quite closeness to power in Canada. The worst of these groups still glorify their fascist leaders, and they receive millions of dollars from the Canadian government for their publications, and they've never been closer to power. They get money for their meeting centers, their parades, and their publications. And I feel similar now in this stage of the process of trying to expose these East European organizations as I did back in 1988 when I found out about Armex, but no one else knew anything about it. And so I was trying to tell everybody, hey, there's this big problem we've got here. Let's look at this. Anyway, for decades, these organizations supported U.S. and NATO wars like Korea and Vietnam, which where millions of people were killed because they were fighting against Western imperial interests. And the organizers of this conference have asked us on this panel to talk, to say a few inspiring things. Now, this is really difficult. Inspiring things. How do you say inspiring? To one person, what might be inspiring would be totally boring and useless to somebody else. We're all at different places on the path. We all have different needs and different things that are going to inspire us. So I don't know. But really, I was thinking this is really not rocket science. Rocket science is really simple. I don't know who first told me this idea. I can't claim credit for this, but rocket science is really simple. But opposing war is much more complicated than building a rocket or a missile. I mean, that's simple. That's just physics and engineering and whatnot. This is what we're doing is really complicated because it has to do with, we're dealing with veils of deception, propaganda, and ancient belief systems that hold people captive and enslave people and hold people's minds, in cages, and people don't even know they're in cages. They don't even know they've been enslaved by these ideologies. So I want to talk now about preaching to the converted. You often hear this as a put down. Oh, you're just preaching to the converted. That's kind of what I'm doing now, preaching to the so-called converted. And I hope no one takes offense by what I have to say, but it's not a waste of time. Preaching to the converted is not a waste of time. In fact, I argue that it's one of the most important things that we can do because sadly, progressive activists and groups sometimes support wars, invasions, and regime changes. And I've spent decades studying these things and opposing these progressive groups that sometimes support wars. And I've been publishing this stuff in Press for Conversion. Like, I'll give you a few little examples, but I'm sure other people have their own examples of this. In 1999, many progressive people supported Canada's role in the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. In 2003, Canada was very deeply involved in the Iraq War and was probably the third or fourth most complicit country in the world in that war. But the Liberal government created a myth that Canada said no to the war and that Canada wasn't involved. And many peace activists still spread this myth. It's a dangerous myth. It's harmful to us. It undermines our work. In 2004, a similar narrative was emerged by the Liberals, saying that Canada refused involvement in Star Wars, in promoting the Star Wars weapon systems. That, too, was a myth. The same year, Canada helped invade Haiti, and Canada, France, and the United States overthrew the elected government in Haiti and installed a dictatorship there that killed thousands of people. Now, Canadian peace, development, human rights groups, the biggest ones in the country, many funded by the government, but not all of them, but many of them were funded by the government, and they were deeply involved in setting up the invasion and the coup, and then covering it up afterwards and promoting it as if it was a good thing. These are the progressive groups. Many here are engaged in trying to move the NDP and the Greens to support Palestinian rights, for example. And so they know what I'm talking about. And to oppose, other people are trying to oppose Canada's efforts to overthrow the elected government in Venezuela. But, it's really hard to do these things, even to get progressive political parties to support this opposition to war. This dynamic has been going on in Canada for centuries, and I want to draw attention to the parallels with the residential school system. Now, residential so-called schools were justified as progressive. Many were inspired by the Protestant churches were led in the residential schools by what was called the social gospel movement. Now, people maybe don't know much about that. I've written about that in Press for Conversion. The so-called schools were instruments of genocide and slavery, and they were run by people who thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were promoting education. They thought they were promoting civilization, and they also said they were promoting Canadianization and Christianization, which they thought all these things were great. For example, J.S. Woodsworth, who is revered by the mainstream left as a hero, was a terrible racist, and he co-founded the CCF party, which became the NDP in 1960. So preaching to the so-called converted is really central because the masters of war need public support, and they need our taxes, they need our bodies, and they need our votes. And nothing helps them convince the public more than having progressive groups and progressive leaders support the official narratives on this or that war or this regime change or that regime change. They need the public support, and the public will believe progressive movements if they say, oh yes, this is a great war. We should be behind it because we don't like war, but this war we need to support, whether it's Libya or Syria or whatever, because we're fighting for peace and we're fighting for democracy and human rights and et cetera, et cetera. So we need to deprive them in whatever support that they get to propagandize and promote their wars. And they do that to a large extent by using the mainstream media they need to push in order to get the progressive to support the war they're going into. Because when you want to push a war, you don't go and tell the public, oh, we need this war because, we need to help the billionaires funding us. We need to help them to make more money. They can't tell the public that, right? And that's what wars are about. They're about making money, not just the weapons makers. They make a lot of money, but that's really not. They're just the tools that they use. The wars are necessary to overthrow governments that are unfriendly to business, to corporations, and the wars are necessary to keep those repressive governments that are friendly to business, to keep them in power. They need their weapons. We need to use weapons in wars to overthrow the governments that we don't like because they're not friendly to corporations, and to help those governments stay in power once we've put them in power or once they've been in power for whatever reason. So preaching to the so-called converted is really crucial. It's really central. It's really important. And don't ever let anybody tell you that it's not, oh, you're just preaching to the converted. No, because the converted aren't all turning from the same page. So preaching to the right wing is really a waste of our breath. Looking at it from the other side of the coin, the mass media is a huge wall that's blocking our ability to communicate with the public. And so we have to do whatever we can to reach who we can reach. Now, who can we reach? We can use our connections and we can reach the progressive movements. And we should be really trying our darndest to try to make sure that the progressive movements don't support wars and human rights violations and regressive regime changes and all of those horrible things that the Canadian government has been promoting for centuries. A crucial role to play in just promoting our own research. Research is really important. It's the intelligence agency of the peace movement is really important, because it's really great to be active and to get out there and do a protest and all that. But sometimes people can protest and become active, but they don't really know what's going on. They haven't done enough research to figure out what's going on, and maybe they're listening to the mass media too much, and maybe they believe the lies that they're being told by the mass media. And the peace movement and the other progressive movements are just as susceptible to falling, maybe not quite as susceptible as some other groups, but they are still susceptible to falling for lies and propaganda and as other movements. So as peace activists, as human rights activists and progressives, we need to do our best to try to help share, to do research, to find out what's really going on, and to help educate ourselves. We need to help educate ourselves and others in the movement. So thanks very much, and I hope everybody has a great conference and learns a lot and makes lots of good connections. And thanks for having me on. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Richard, for that powerful way of introducing the broader themes, the history of CanSec, and sort of weaving it together into the importance of really what we're doing today. And like you said, the research and the sharing of information that can so often be undervalued. That's what this weekend is all about. We are all over with our schedule today. I'm sorry that we were not able to bring Shannon Chief back right now, but we've confirmed that she's going to lead us off tomorrow. So we definitely will hear from her. And I was so sorry that she was cut off in that way. I will, though, since we are starting today and in connection with what the previous speakers have already brought up, I do want to take a minute right now just to say that This conference, as I mentioned, was intended to take place in person in Ottawa and unceded Algonquin territory. I myself am based in Toronto, which I imagine, like many of the cities people here are joining from, is one that's built on stolen Indigenous land. In my case, it's land that is the ancestral territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples, and it's land that needs to be given back. For people here are joining this conference from over 25 countries around the world, for all of us who are joining from so-called Canada, and from many other places as well, but I'll speak for here. The foundational war of this country is, of course, one of colonization. And I think it's important to say that we can't talk about militarism or our arms trade or a weapons expo happening here without talking about the colonial violence, historic and present, that's at the very heart of these problems. And specifically right now, it feels very important to take a minute to acknowledge the huge amount of collective trauma and grief across Turtle Island, across often known as North America, and especially Canada today, and over the past few days. For those who aren't here and aren't hearing our news, just a few days ago, there was a discovery by the Tukamloops de Secwepemc Nation confirming that the bodies of 215 children were buried at the former Kamloops Indian residential school site in British Columbia, a residential school which closed in 1978. I think millions of people are reeling from this very fresh news. And while the deaths were known by the communities impacted, it's a shocking discovery. The number of children that were killed, several as young as 3 years old, and also the discovery that the murder of these children in that government-run school was covered up by so many people in power over many years. I know for me as a mother to a very young child, I can scarcely bear to think about what this must feel like. And this is the context, at least here in so-called Canada right now, that this conference is beginning within. So I do want to acknowledge that and hold space for that. And I'll ask us to just take a silent pause for just a few seconds and to think of, to send love to Indigenous people across Turtle Island today, to really acknowledge the ongoing trauma, the unending devastation of the Indian residential school, of the ongoing colonization across these lands. May they rest in power. Now I would like to continue to bring up our next speaker to share some more of the context and the history that brings us to this conference today, to continue where Richard left off. Our next speaker is Brent Patterson, the Executive Director of Peace Brigades International Canada, and a longtime organizer and activist who has coordinated many cross-country grassroots campaigns and mobilizations and innumerable civil disobedience actions. If there's a protest, an action, a demo happening in Ottawa, you can bet Brent is there, and I'm so pleased to welcome him to the stage now.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you too for speaking to the issue of the genocide that has happened in this country and the ongoing genocide that continues to happen in relation to Indigenous peoples in this country. It's very important, I think, for our movements to recognize that and to integrate that into our work in a powerful and meaningful way. I'm speaking to you from unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory in the city of Ottawa. And just, I guess, wanting to add a bit to what Richard was saying in terms of the history of Armex in the city, or the history of the protests against Armex. A powerful story to be told, and maybe just as we're collectively recalling or sharing that history, just wanting to add that maybe on a personal note, but that Murray Thompson, who some of you may know, is one of the founders of Project Plowshares in this country, one of the founders of Peace Brigades International, was a regular participant in the protests against Armex and CANSEC, And also just to say that I was so pleased to see that the organization that I'm with, Peace Brigades International Canada, was involved in the protests against Armex at least 30 years ago. I found some minutes and some files to place us there. So glad to have that connection to the history. And maybe just to speak to one of the most recent protests against CanSec in this city, which was in June 2019, prior to the pandemic, where we had more than 100 people come out and block the entranceways, the roadways into the parking lot at the EY Center, which is where the Arms Fair takes place, situated relatively close to the Ottawa International Airport, blocking people from coming in, holding banners, arms dealers not welcome, business as usual means death, very clear messages of opposition to the weapons show. So just kind of wanting to share a little bit of that picture, and maybe also just to give one story. I think there's many stories about the reality of what happens after an arms show, but Rachel was on a PBI Canada webinar yesterday talking about this, and just wanting to share this story again too, about the sales or what happens at CanSec. And so we do know that in 2014 that the Canadian Commercial Corporation, which is a federal government agency that promotes exports, toured a delegation at the EY Center at CanSec from Colombia. And many of you may well be following the news about the extreme state repression and violence and death and injuries that are happening in Colombia right now in the context of a national strike that's happening there. And just keeping in mind that it was in that year, in 2014, when the Canadian government agency toured the CanSec exhibition floor with the delegation from Colombia. It was that year that Canada exported more than $45 million of military goods, military hardware, to Colombia, most likely including the armored personnel carriers that were manufactured near Toronto and sold to the National Police. So if you've been following it all on social media and have seen these armored vehicles that are spraying water and firing venom rockets and shooting tear gas at people participating in the strike in Colombia, there's a direct connection back to the CanSec and what happens in Ottawa. And it's something I didn't know at the time when we were doing our blockade at CanSec in 2019, but it's something now that I hold very much in my thoughts, and I think something for all of us perhaps to be thinking about as we find ourselves on the streets, as we find ourselves in front of an arms fair, as we're sort of being perhaps pushed back to a sidewalk by the police, to keep in mind the very real, the very tangible impacts of these weapons that are merchandised, that are promoted, that are sold through CanSec. I think that reality is really important to hold. I might just also say too, in term, and Richard briefly alluded to it, that the city of Ottawa at one time had banned arms shows from public properties in this city, which is, I think, an important municipal action. Noticed this week that the city of Los Angeles passed a resolution, just back to the story of Colombia, passed a resolution condemning the police violence, the state repression that's happening now in Colombia, and calling on the United States government to suspend arms sales, weapon sales to Colombia. And I think for me, it sort of has re-inspired the idea of how we approach municipal action as a way to confront the arms trade, to confront and help to stop the export of weapons, and to think about that in the city of Ottawa and other cities around the world in terms of what we can do locally. And maybe I'll just wrap up by saying that because of the pandemic and also because of thousands of people signing a petition saying that CanSec shouldn't happen last year, that CanSec didn't happen in 2020, but it is scheduled to occur again in June 2022. And so we are in the midst of beginning to plan for that and drawing inspiration from other protests against arms shows, arms fairs around the world, and trying to draw those lessons. And I think this weekend, today and this weekend, should be a really good opportunity to learn from each other and to think about what we can do to strengthen and improve on the protests that we do at these arms shows. And just keeping in mind too, last point, that earlier this week the Government of Canada released its report on the arms exports, the amount of arms exports that it did last year, and it was just shy of $2 billion. And when we look at just over the last 6-year period, Canada's exported some $10 billion in weapons and armored vehicles and components to the world. And so when we think about CanSec, we really need to directly tie that back in to what we're seeing in terms of those numbers and seeing in the world, and to find some courage and strength in that, to continue and to deepen our resistance to these merchants of death. So thank you very much, and I wish everyone a powerful and meaningful experience with this conference.
Thank you so much, Brent, for that context and those powerful stories, and for making the connection that CanSec is not just a Canadian problem, and resisting CanSec is not a Canadian project, but what are just the tip of the iceberg of the connections to countries around the world, other countries that are engaged in violence, other countries that are on the receiving end of this violence. Thank you so much. And next, it's my Vanessa Lantain, the current national coordinator at the Canadian Voice of Women. Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, which is Canada's longest running national women's peace organization. She has worked in various countries around the world and is a force to be reckoned with, and her organization have been involved in this resistance to CanSec and the planning of NOWAR 2021 since the beginning. So welcome, Vanessa, to the stage.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and hello for being here. I am thrilled to be speaking at the welcoming address for the No War 2021 Peace Conference, and I'm looking at the numbers, and it's amazing, 130 people. I think Rachel mentioned around 25 countries around the world. That's fantastic. It's great to be here, and I really want to thank World Beyond War and the extensive network of peace activists that have come together to make this an international protest over the years. So yes, as Rachel mentioned, my name is Vanessa Lantain, and I'm the National Coordinator of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. We are an organization that has been running for 61 years this year, and there are so many incredible peace builders in this network. I was going to start naming some, but I wouldn't know when to stop, and I only have about 4 minutes left. So I'd like to start off by saying that VOW's national office, as well as myself right now, are located on the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And wherever we are on Turtle Island, as Rachel made the address, and I do hope I'm able to join tomorrow to hear what Shannon has to say, but we need to be allies to Indigenous people and Indigenous rights as the ongoing colonial violence continues, despite it being talked about in the past. So it is humbling to hear about the years of organizing around CanSec and why we are doing it, as Brent just mentioned. And many of you have done that and have built up this wonderful peace network. I know Voice of Women members Joe, Judith, and Tamara protested CanSec when Saab had their fighter jet, the Gripen, stationed outside the entrance, and that because of Tamara's diligent research, the fighter jet purchase has been delayed for 11 years when her information request revealed the fighter jets had been budgeted for without jet engines. Kind of an important part of jets, if you ask me. So I had just started at the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace when Tamara proposed the No Fighter Jets initiative to the board at the end of 2019, and we set out to make this a national campaign. And with the connections of World Beyond War, Peace Brigades International, Coalition to Oppose the Arms Trade, and so many longtime peace advocates already solidified from years of organizing around CanSec, the No Fighter Jets Coalition and the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network were formed, and it's incredible to see the supporters and capacity growing of each, and I was honored to be on the organizing committees. So if anyone is interested and not currently a part of these networks, please get in touch. We need everyone to make the campaign and peace revitalization movement unavoidable by the current political economy of war that we are living in. We don't need to export weapons to Saudi Arabia, Colombia, or Israel, and we don't need to buy fighter jets to bomb civilians and infrastructure in other countries in the name of peace. So with the No Fighter Jets Coalition, we have had 2 national days of action, webinars, public protests, a vigil. We are sending a letter to the Pope with over 300 signatories, and had a fast where dozens of people participated in not eating. And myself and Dr. Brendan Martin did not eat for 2 weeks, and we are not stopping with our actions until we stop this purchase. So if you want to take action right now, after I speak, I'm going to put in the chat our parliamentary petition to the Canadian House of Commons, which is sponsored by Green MP Paul Manley, to stop the fighter jet purchase and to redirect our taxpayer dollars towards things like the Jordan's Principle, and paying Indigenous children and people what they are owed from years of underservice in comparison to non-Indigenous people. We can also use that money for other things that Canadians need, like affordable housing, public transportation, a Green New Deal, job retraining for oil sands workers, support for our healthcare system that has been put under immense pressure and stress from COVID-19, or education so that each child can have the highest quality schooling and care, to give each child the best start possible. So these goals we must keep at front and center in our mind as we do this work. We always should be looking and remembering what we are doing this for. And as we look into the future, I also want to say that we must demand that the Canadian government and all governments within our respective countries make disarmament a priority. This is our taxpayer dollars, and they are using them for weapons to bomb people in other countries, and we need to speak out against this. We are calling on the Canadian government to make disarmament a political priority, and we would like to hear from all of you on June 21st as we hold a civil society discussion with everyone welcome. I'll put another link in the chat for that as well, because we need to stop weapons trade shows, war games that glorify war. We have to stop the warships, the fighter jets, armed drones, attack helicopters, and any other expensive, inhumane, and immoral weapon that the military-industrial complex says we need, and instead we must invest in tried and true nonviolent peace and diplomacy processes. I really do believe that we can transform into a non-killing society, and we already do have methods of conflict resolution available to us, other than causing devastating chaos and destruction on communities and our Earth. So I hope everyone is as excited and inspired to have a wonderful No War 2021 Peace Conference as I am, where we can learn and solidify these connections, share our visions and ideas with each other, and please feel free to get in touch. Thank you all for being here and your tireless efforts to make the world a less dangerous place, and happy peace conferencing. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. You packed a lot into a few minutes, and so much excitement about Finally, as the final speaker for our welcome address, I'm really pleased to bring up Dave Webb. Dave is the chair of the UK Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, the vice president of the International Peace Bureau, and the convener of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, as well as being an emeritus professor of peace and conflict studies at Leeds Beckett University. He's been involved in this conference since it was first conceived of over 2 years ago. Welcome, Dave. Dave, we seem to be having trouble bringing you up. Can you request to come up again? There you are. I'm so sorry. You're not muted, but you don't seem to have a sound source that is working right now. Okay, well, maybe I'll give you a minute to maybe refresh the page and come back, and maybe I'll share what I was going to share after you spoke, and then we'll come back to you, Dave. So maybe just refresh the page and then come back. And there's also the gear icon on the bottom that can set your sound settings. Sorry about that, Dave. Well, we expected some hiccups on the first day, and I want to thank everyone for your patience. We'll get them all out of the way today, and then the rest will be easy sailing. We'll come back to Dave in just a minute. I want to thank the 3 speakers who spoke so far. We didn't want to just to erase any of the decades-long history of opposing the specific weapons expo that this conference was timed to coincide with. We really wanted to highlight the work of the many organizations who've been doing this for decades and have been part of planning this conference. This doesn't just belong to World Beyond War. This is really a much bigger movement project, and we wanted to honor that. And so thank you so much to Vanessa, to Brent, to Richard for making that clear. I think our movement history is so important to share and to uphold. And thank you for doing that. We'll get back to Dave in a minute, who's also a big part of the history and the present of this conference. But I wanted to share one thing, which is that we, as Brent mentioned, CanSec is canceled for this year, but is slated to come back next year. And we're determined to demand the permanent cancellation of CanSec, to say good riddance now and good riddance forever. And one small solidarity action that we are asking you to do with us to get CanSec permanently canceled, but also to stand in solidarity with communities around the world, as Brent highlighted, who are really facing down the barrel of the weapons that are sold at this weapons expo. So I invite you to join in a solidarity action with us over the course of this conference, over the next few days, and that is to join us in recording a short solidarity video message. We will compile it, the little clips from each person, and we'll be sharing it with our friends and allies around the world. And I want to highlight that we've particularly promised to share it with specific allies in Yemen, in Palestine, and in Colombia, places where militarized violence has, of course, recently escalated to horrifying effect, and where we've tracked how the weapons that are peddled at CanSec are a direct part of the devastation and the destruction happening on the ground. So we hope you will join us over the course of this conference in demanding that your government stop arming the countries that are bombing and occupying Yemen and Palestine, stop arming the Colombian military and police force, and that CanSec is canceled for good. And the way I will ask you to do it, not right now, but throughout the conference, is to visit the expo booth that's called Take Action. So it's on the left side of your screen. Again, don't click it now, but later click the button that says Expo, and there are many booths. You should visit them all, but one says Take Action, and there's clear instructions on how you record just a short video message so we can really share our solidarity globally, and also our demand to end these weapons fairs. There's also links there to share a message on Twitter and on Facebook. And I would invite all of you to drop links that you have in the chat of that Take Action booth. That'll serve as sort of a message board where people can see various ways that they can take action. So again, in the Take Action booth, in the expo area, in that chat, there will be everything that every conference attendee wants to put in there with links to take action. It'll stay up throughout the conference, and other people can come and can scroll through and can click on that. Now I'm going to try to bring up Dave Webb again to speak with us. Hopefully we'll have better luck this time. I'm so sorry, we can't hear you, Dave. I don't know if you have headphones or so forth, but I'm so sorry it's not working right now. I'm sorry about that. We may in fact need to do the same thing we'll be doing with Shannon, which is to bring you on tomorrow to share, because it's very disappointing that we can't hear you right now. I'm so sorry, Dave. We'll figure out a way to bring you back. We'll be in touch, or at the very least to have you record what you were going to say so we can play it tomorrow. All right. Sorry, Dave. Well, that's a little bit of a disappointing note to end this welcoming address on, and I thank everyone for your patience. I'm going to bring on David Swanson in a second to kick off our opening keynote panel. And but I just want to briefly just say thank you again to everyone who has spoken so far, and to help us really start this conference in a good way, with very powerful poetry and with the historical context that we fit into. So thank you so much.
Hi, Rachel. Can you hear me okay? You can? Okay. Wonderful job so far. Terrific to be here. Very glad to be with everybody. I'm going to be introducing 3 speakers, and then we're going to have questions and answers. And for this event that is happening on the main stage, you need to put your questions in the chat that you find under the stage tab. For future sessions, including just shortly this evening, you'll be able to also ask questions via video and audio, but that's for the sessions. This is on the stage. So at any time, put questions into the stage chat, and we will get to them. We're going to go for about an hour, and we're going to have 3 speakers followed by the question and answers. And the topic is sort of, how does war move from weapons fairs to war zones, and how do those who wish to abolish war counter the war machine at each stage? We're actually going to look even prior to the weapons fairs at the mining and manufacturing of the weapons, as well as how they are sold at events like CANSEC, the Weapons Expo in Canada that we want to see stay canceled, and DSEI, a weapons show in the UK, and from there to what happens with the weapons, what they do in places like Yemen and so many other places around the world that don't manufacture the weapons but see them used. So I'd like to bring up our first speaker, who will be Daniel Selwyn, who is an education researcher with the London Mining Network, LMN, an alliance of 21 organizations working to expose human rights abuses and environmental crimes committed by mining companies. Daniel Selwyn recently authored Martial Mining: Resisting Extractivism and War Together. Daniel, take it away.
David?
I can hear you great. Go right ahead.
Thank you, David, and thank you to World Beyond War for inviting me to speak on this opening panel, for organizing this really important conference. It's been really great to hear the rich history of resistance to the arms fair that we're going to be building on this weekend. Also want to thank Elle Jones for the really incredible and powerful poems that you shared, and to preemptively thank my co-panelists Bianca and Hamza for your presentations, which I'm very much looking forward to. It's an honor to be in conversation with you and everyone attending this conference. Really amazing to already see people from all over the world, Italy, Uruguay, Bangladesh, Ireland here to resist the war machine and build a peaceful and more and better society for all of us. I want to acknowledge my presence here, albeit virtually, as a British citizen from the Jewish diaspora, arguably not living on stolen land, and I certainly identify with an anti-Zionist tradition which holds that our homeland is exactly where we already live. I benefit in material ways from living on the land from which an incalculable number of worlds and lands have been and continue to be stolen. We don't learn this in schools in the UK, where I'm now training to be a teacher, but it was, of course, a royal proclamation of the British Crown that illegitimately asserted authority over Turtle Island and created the settler colonial state of Canada in what has been called the biggest land theft in the history of humankind. And the devastation of social, political, economic, cultural, and spiritual life this initiated has once again, as Rachel and as I'm sure Shannon Chief will speak about tomorrow, has been reiterated as an ongoing present rather than a resolved past. And as we're all aware, the unceded and unsurrendered land continues to generate vast revenues and profits for both the settler state and for multinational corporations. Although I'm going to be presenting mainly about London and temporary role as a global capital of organized violence through the mining industry and the arms trades, and the extractive zones and mining sites that are at the base of global supply chains for military hardware, this obviously can't be entangled from the history of British colonial conquest. And we only need to look at a province like Alberta to see how the structures of British imperialism persist to this day, which not only hosts the genocidal tar sands, which produces almost 2 million barrels of oil a day under the influence of from British companies like Shell and BP and banks like HSBC and Barclays, but it also hosts the British Army's largest military training base. And historic rushes for gold, nickel and coal, alongside very lenient mining laws, have laid the foundations for a mining industry where up to 70% of mining, 75% of mining companies around the world are concentrated on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And these companies, Barrick Gold and Teck Resources, collectively extract minerals from over 100 countries around the world. And only London really is guilty of a comparable extractive influence worldwide. And that's where the London Mining Network, which I'm a proud member of, comes into it. We're a network of 21 different organizations, and we work, as David said, to expose human rights abuses and environmental crimes committed by mining companies that are based in London. And our partner organizations from Colombia to Eritrea, from Brazil to the Philippines, are acutely and intimately aware of the links between the mining industry and the arms trade, which form the basis of my research. And for them, for these communities, these concerns have never been separate, as the cycle that you can see on the screen shows. And at this point, I'll give a shout out to Kay Stevens, who did the incredible graphic designs for the Marshall Mining Report. Cycle shows as well as that the forced displacement of communities from their lands, the explosives and toxic chemicals used to remove industrial volumes of minerals from the earth, and the policing of extractive zones has always been a militarized process. The arms trade, private security companies, mercenaries, state militaries, paramilitaries, the police, and other institutions and technologies of bordering and surveillance all work together to make mining possible. And the main argument at the center of the Marshall Mining Report is that the cobalt, copper, aluminium, iron, titanium, and other minerals that are extracted from these mining sites are what in turn makes war possible. This nexus or this cycle became apparent to me through my involvement in one of London Mining Network's solidarity campaigns with the Marikana Mines, who went out in strike for a living wage at Lunman Platinum Mine in 2012, which is at the heart of the Bushveld complex in South Africa, where around 80% of the world's platinum is located. And the majority of this dense and durable and extremely valuable metal is used in catalytic converters for engines, which purifies toxic air emissions in automobiles, but will also be found in armored vehicles and fighter and transport aircraft at the arms fairs like CANSEC and DICE as well. After 5 months of strike action in Maracana, with rising tensions between organized and insurgent trade unions and the mine's private security, Lunmin's chief executive urged for a massive police and possible army mine. And another on the board, who is now the president of African Civil Rights, called the workers there, quote, dastardly criminals, and advised the police to act in a more and 4 mortuary vans were ordered, as well as assault rifles and extra ammunition. This led up to August the 16th, 2012, where 30 were shot by the police in 2 separate massacres, and another 78 were injured, hundreds more arrested and incarcerated. In 2012 as well, the UK government licensed £369 million worth of arms exports to the South African government that same year. And it's possible, if not probable, that some of this military equipment at least was used in the massacres of these workers. Lunmin had paid its shareholders 607 million in dividends, diverted 100 to a subsidiary in the tax haven of Bermuda in the years preceding the massacres, while the people of Maracana were left with contaminated water, polluted air and poisoned soils, and unsafe and inadequate housing, as well as over-policed and underserviced communities. Lunmin itself is a corporate descendant of Rhodes's settler colonization of Southern Africa, as well as being a long-standing and major beneficiary of apartheid rule. And to many people, Maracana demonstrated that the terrors of apartheid and white supremacy, which my grandfather resisted his entire life in South Africa and in exile in London, are too raw and enduring to be called legacies. Being part of the Maracana campaign and for reparations taught me that mining sites are not simply a prelude to the war zones where minerals are being extracted innocently from the earth, transformed into more sinister purposes like weapons for war, or arguably more socially useful products like the digital technologies that are bringing us together to communicate for this conference tonight. Rather, many of the communities that London Mining Network works with experience mining sites as war zones in and of themselves. And we look, for example, at Indonesia's occupation of West Papua, to Cerrejón in Colombia as well. And this is evident in the invasions, the forced disappearances, and the assassinations, which have seen 4 land and environmental defenders killed every week on average since the Paris Climate Agreement was signed. But another area in which we see this happening is how corporate strategies apply military counterinsurgency tactics to target the hearts and minds of mining communities and pacify or the root causes of violence, from dispossession, pollution to impeachment. So to counter these industry or mining industry narratives of benign technological progress and eco-friendly futures, our Marshall Mining Report wanted to more accurately situate companies like Rio Tinto, Anglo American, Glencore, BHP at the base of global supply chains for the arms trade, as well as related policing, border and security industries. So as you can see in this image, we have the F-35s, the most expensive weapon systems in history, the UK being responsible for building approximately 15% of the production. And you see the table of elements and minerals that go into making use of military equipment. And if we look at perhaps maybe the most extreme example, nuclear weapons, of which Britain recently announced it was going to be increasing its stockpile to 216, the Royal Navy's nuclear submarines, which are assembled by an unholy alliance of BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce, Lockheed Martin, and Serco, total over 70,000 tons of materials, 170 kilometers of pipes, 52,000 electrical items, 1,500 kilometers of cables, and each of them carry up to 16 Trident missiles, which share 48 warheads. And like I said, this necessitates an entire periodic table of minerals and a global network of mining sites. And for nuclear weapons in particular, the most important of these elements is uranium, which is mined, yellow cake converted into hexafluoride before being enriched and pressed into bronze fuel for projectiles and explosives. And the majority of uranium mining today continues on Aboriginal and indigenous lands in Australia and Canada, as well as in Kazakhstan, Niger, and Namibia. And in fact, the history of Britain's nuclear arsenal is tied to the Russing uranium mine in Namibia, which was operated for decades by Rio Tinto whilst the country was occupied by apartheid South Africa. And in a similar vein, the atrocities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have been tied to the uranium mine deposit that was discovered by an English geologist at the time of Belgium's Holocaust of at least 10 million Congolese people. And these historical genocide and ecocide are fundamental to the transformation of companies like BHP, Anglo American, and Rio Tinto from settler mining companies in Southern Africa and Australia into multi-billion-dollar transnational corporations at the base of global supply chains, from everything from nuclear weapons to mobile phones to wind turbines. And another area where what we are calling martial mining is becoming increasingly evident is in the geopolitical conflicts over rare earth elements, which, although not as rare as the name suggests, are essential to many military applications like drones, lasers, precision-guided missiles due to their high magnetic intensity. And because of China's overwhelming dominance of rare earth production, this has prompted a militarized race to expand mining frontiers from Greenland and the Amazon to the depths of the oceans and even the surface of the moon. And we're seeing British companies like Rainbow Rare Earths and Mkango Resources, who are already developing deposits in Burundi and Malawi, with contracts lined up with the US Department of Defense to provide them with these really essential rare earth elements. And finally, and perhaps in my opinion most absurdly, we are seeing subsidiary of the world's largest military contractor, Lockheed Martin, called UK Seabed Resources, which is now the single of international seabed. Sponsored by the British government, and this arms company is primed to start mining the floors of the Pacific Ocean for copper, cobalt, and rare earth elements, which is a process that threatens mass species extinctions and the food chains that feed billions of people around the world. So in summary, to draw all of this together, our key argument in the Marshall Mining Report is that militarism is more than a diversion of money from the health of people and planet towards warfare. Rather, it is an essential ingredient that is fueling the climate and ecological crises. And acknowledging this shift, I think, challenges us to extend our understanding of the war machine, and by extension, our resistance to it, from the imperialist assaults on Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen, to the extractive zones, the smelters, and the refineries, the ships and the railways which transport, the factories where these weapons are made, arms fairs where they are promoted and sold, the military bases where they are tested. And the hope is that by seeing these geographies of violence as inherently connected, and that by naming these industries of war and as co-conspirators in incinerating the planet that we all depend on for sustenance and survival, that we can equally see that our struggles and our resistance is shared and indivisible too. So I'll finish by saying that from Dicey in London to Cansec all solidarity in shutting down every arms fair, in abolishing the institutions of war, and in building the worlds of abundance, joy, care, creativity, and love that we need and deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Terrific job. People, please put questions for further information from Daniel in the chat under the stage tab. Our second speaker is Bianca Mugenyi, an activist, author, and journalist based in Montreal. She directs the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute. She is a former co-executive director of The Leap and helped to launch the Leap Manifesto in 2015. Which is a vision for a just transition away from fossil fuels. Bianca, take it away.
Thank you so much, David. Can you hear me all right?
Perfectly, yes.
Good stuff. Okay, so it's wonderful to be here with all of you. Thank you so much to World Beyond War and all the people behind the scenes. Thank you so much, David, for your lovely introduction. I also want to extend a thanks to Rachel Small and Greta Zaro, who I've been liaising with on this event. And just thanks to everyone who's taken the time to be here for this discussion. It's amazing to see so many people. So today I'm speaking to you from the island of Montreal, or Tiohtià:ke, which is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people, the keepers of the eastern door of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, a place that has long been a point of meeting and exchange among many First Nations. It's really great to be here with all of you discussing the need for a shift away from militarization, from militarized foreign policies. It feels more urgent than ever. And thank you so much, Daniel, for connecting the dots for us so eloquently and clearly between mineral extraction and the war machine, and for reminding us of our shared struggle. And, you know, in listening to you, I really thought about how important it is for us, especially, you know, for those of us living in Canada, to stay very conscious of the fact that, you know, that Canada continues to exist as a resource extraction colonial force, and to not believe the hype, as you said, about this representing progress. So for my part in this discussion, I thought it could be useful for me to share the scope of Canada's militarism. As mentioned, I work at the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and you know, in terms of the scope, spoiler alert, it's extensive. And so I wanted to just hone in on how militarized we truly are as a country, because it's astounding. And it's a fact that runs counter to our reputation as a peacekeeping nation. Even at this moment, at a time when Canada is not officially at war, there's around 2,000 Canadian troops stationed across the globe on more than 24 international missions. In recent months, there were upwards of 800 Canadian troops engaged in Canada's mission in Iraq. There's a comparable number of troops stationed on Russia's border, with around 500 Canadians leading a NATO mission in Latvia, with 200 troops as part of a training effort in the Ukraine. And Canada has dozens of smaller missions. Some of the more notable are supporting a security force to help oversee Israel's occupation of the West Bank, as well as soldiers in South Korea. Moving to Europe, in Brussels, there are dozens of Canadian soldiers stationed at NATO headquarters, and another 150 Canadian military personnel are stationed at the North American Aerospace Defense Command headquarters in Colorado, as well as a smaller number at NORAD's hub near Tampa Bay, Florida. And NORAD and Canadian military that are tied to these bases are essentially supporting US airstrikes around the world. So our troops are everywhere, and it's a bit of a list, but I feel like it's important to just sort of put it together and to just take a good hard look. And in recent months, we've also seen Canadian naval vessels have been a part of US and NATO-led missions across the world seas. They've run provocative maneuvers in the South China Sea against China and entered the Black Sea bordering Russia. They've patrolled the African coast and traversed the Caribbean. Now, beyond Canadian naval vessels and troops who are deployed all around the world, the Department of National Defense is by far the biggest federal budget item. And to the extent that we see our budget as a reflection of our priorities, the military is the Canadian government's biggest priority. Canada's official defense budget, I think, is around $24 billion, but the real budget that's actually spent on the military is over $30 billion. And we know from the 2017 government defense policy statement titled Strong, Secure, and Engaged, the plan is to increase military spending by 70% over a decade. I think it's important to contrast this. So Canada currently devotes more than 10 times more money to the military than it does to Environment and Climate Change Canada. And put another way, as the climate crisis deepens, the Liberal government appeared to be 10 times more concerned about the military than ecological collapse. Even the Veterans Affairs budget alone is 2 or 3 times the size of the Environment Canada budget. So the Canadian government really likes to talk about peace, but is investing in war. The government is plowing astounding sums of money into war machines for the decades to come. Vanessa and some other speakers already brought up Trudeau's plans to move forward with what is officially a $19 billion fighter jet purchase. This would be the second most expensive government procurement program ever. And this is $19 billion in and of itself is a massive, massive sum, but that's just the sticker price. A recent report released by the No Fighter Jets Coalition actually estimates the full life cycle cost of these 88 new warplanes at more like $77 billion. And this money that's going to these dangerous fighter jets, these polluting fighter jets that are not necessary, is money that could be used to turbocharge a just recovery that we know we need so badly. And alongside this, if that weren't enough, plans are also moving forward for the single largest outlay of public money in Canadian history, with Canada now preparing to equip its Navy with new frigates at an estimated cost of over $70 billion, starting cost, but estimates, including the life cycle, put it more at $286 billion with a B dollars over their life cycle. So these 15 vessels, what's costing so much? Basically, they're set to be kitted out with all kinds of outrageous weapons, including Tomahawk cruise missiles that are capable of striking land targets up to 1,700 kilometers away. Why? And by halting this single unnecessary government purchase, for that amount of money, we could lift all boil water advisories on reserves. We could build social housing for 1 million people in Canada. We could launch a generation-defining rollout of renewable energy projects. We could cover the cost of all this by halting this purchase. Yet there are no elected officials even talking about it. So it's important to be very clear that both of these gigantic purchases are offensive weapons designed to enhance the Canadian military's ability to join operations with the US and with NATO. Another important aspect of the scope of Canada's militarism, very related to this conference, is the extent of arms manufacturing. Canada's arms industry is massive. The Canadian Association of Defence and Security Industries, CADSI, estimates the arms industry at $10 billion a year. Brent gave us this year's statistic, and I believe last year Canadian weapons exports reached their record high of $3.7 billion. And as mentioned, this number doesn't include Canada's largest customer, which is always the US. Canada is selling armored vehicles, sniper rifles, and other weaponry to the Saudi government, which we know is fueling the war in Yemen. Canada also sells arms to Turkey and to Israel. And it's not just private companies that are selling arms to foreign governments. The state apparatus is advancing it. The Crown Corporation that facilitates arms deals is called the Canadian Commercial Corporation, and this Crown Corporation really greases the wheels of the arms industry by providing contractual support to arms companies. And we're seeing very deep support for the weapons industry from the federal government, providing trade commissioner support, contractual support, and other public supports for weapons. And I think just this week, CTV reported about Canada's extremely lax weapons exports regulations. And I believe activists were quoted saying that, open quote, less than 1% of export permits for military goods were denied in 2020, which is almost a perfect approval rating. This despite many export destinations routinely being the site of serious human rights abuses. But it's much more than passive acceptance of weapons sales. The Department of National Defense, DND, has long promoted arms exports. And even just if you go to its website, right there, they highlight different forms of supports that they provide to exporters. There's one section that reads, open quote, learn how the Department of National Defense can assist in connecting Canadian industry to foreign markets. And one of the ways that that it shills its military goods is through defense attaches. And these are based in 30 diplomatic posts around the world where they promote military exports. And the representatives of DND Defense often talk up Canadian military equipment as part of delegations to international arm fairs, some of which have been mentioned already, including arm fairs like the Abu Dhabi-based International Defense Exhibition and Conference, IDEX. And even the Canadian military is used to sell arms. Canadian officers attend international arms fairs. The Canadian, sometimes the military sort of Navy visits, they visit ports during international arms exhibits, and these are essentially designed to spur arms sales. So one aspect of the promotion of weapons is CANSEC, where we see all kinds of MPs and senators and generals and admirals can all be found rubbing shoulders and in attendance. And for more than 2 decades, this annual Canadian Association of Defense and Securities Industries run, CADSI-run CANSEC conference has brought together representatives of arms companies, of DND, Canadian Forces, and various other arms of the federal government and dozens of foreign governments. So we're here together in part to challenge this. And while there is an immense war machine, there is also resistance to this war machine. And we see this through gatherings like this one here that feature the work of so many brave and brilliant people who are working to end war and to promote peace. Here in Canada, we've seen terrific momentum on a number of different fronts. I'll just name a few. We've seen great momentum building against the Trudeau government's planned purchase of 88 new fighter jets. Where I work at the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, we engaged MPs in a discussion around the need to challenge these warplanes. There's a parliamentary petition right now that several organizations have worked with that is addressing the need to halt the purchase. And that was just launched, and it's passed the threshold to be read in the House of Commons, which means it has to be responded to by the government. The incredible fast that was mentioned, organized by the No Fighter Jet Coalition, where activists, some of whom fasted for 2 weeks, argue that these expensive carbon-intensive warplanes don't deal with real threats. They, in fact, lead to violence. And so, while Canada has been an aggressive proponent of the nuclear-armed NATO alliance, we are also seeing pushback against this in the public sphere becoming increasingly visible. Last month, Toronto Star's Saturday debate was titled, "Should Canada Leave NATO?" And a CFPI fellow, Tamara Lawrence, contributed the op-ed arguing in the affirmative. And, I'm proud to say that the Star hosted the debate partly in reaction to our April 3rd event, why should Canada leave NATO? And it's undoubtedly in part due to its membership in NATO that Canada still hasn't signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is, as mentioned today, is a beacon considered the danger of these weapons. But incredibly, Trudeau has refused to sign while asserting his commitment to a world free of nuclear weapons. Our government also claims to want to advance a feminist foreign policy, to advance a rules-based international order, yet we know the TPNW does that. Alongside World Beyond War, continually struggling for peace. It's such an amazing group that I stand in awe of. Together with other groups, brought together MPs from across the political spectrum to insist that Canada sign the UN Nuclear Ban Treaty, highlighting the need for Canada to make good on its stated priorities. And there's been lots of pressure within Canada's peace movement to stop arming Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about this over the course of the weekend. You know, these light armored vehicles that are being provided to Saudi Arabia have been used against Saudi civilians and are also now being used by Saudi forces in Yemen. And when people in Yemen are being slaughtered by Saudi and UAE forces and calling to the world for help while our country offers diplomatic support and weaponry, alarm bells should be going off. They should be ringing very loud about how much suffering is being aided and abetted, and we need to do whatever we can as citizens to register our opposition. So after Canada lost its second consecutive United Nations Security Council defeat last year, the Foreign Policy Institute released a call for a fundamental reassessment of Canadian foreign policy. And one of the 10 questions that we asked was, should Canada continue to offer financial and diplomatic support to arms exporters or refocus on demilitarization? And so really the kind of final thing I want to touch upon is that while the scope of militarism is astonishing, there's also, I think, an increasing understanding that for real security, we need to embrace the spirit of internationalism. And that in part means understanding the struggle of people around the world as our own, organizing our communities, finding ways to be a part of those struggles, rejecting the notion that because we happen to live or have citizenship in such and such a place, we should have more, deserve more added rights than people born somewhere else. And militarism runs counter to the spirit of internationalism. Its results are division and destruction of life. The Canada's 2017 Strong, Secure, Engaged defense policy claims Canada must actively address threats abroad for stability at home, and that, quote unquote, defending Canada and Canadian interests requires active engagement abroad. But that logic, of course, can be used to justify participating in endless US and NATO-led military endeavors. It is endless. And it is this type of security thinking that undermines this very sense of internationalism that's required to overcome these overlapping crises, the overlapping crises we face this century, from COVID to resource scarcity to climate disruption to the nuclear weapons that threaten the extinction of all life. So let's bet on internationalism instead. It's a force that joins us across borders in common defense of people and of the planet. And here in Canada specifically, but of course this applies to many other countries, we need to keep pushing for a foreign policy that has a focus on peace, human rights, and overcoming global inequities. Thank you. Looking forward to Q&A.
Very well said, Bianca. I am hopeful still that we will have a few minutes at least for Q&A. We have one more speaker. Our third speaker is Hamza Shaiban, who is the president of the Yemeni Community of Canada. He moved to Canada in 2011 and has led many initiatives to raise awareness of the Saudi-led war against Yemen and to advocate for Canada to end its multi-billion-dollar arms deal with Saudi Arabia. Hamza, the floor is yours.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you. Take it away.
Thanks. Thanks also to all the previous speakers. I really enjoyed listening to every single one of you. And I'm very glad to be here with you today. So just before I start talking about the war in Yemen, one very important point that I want to mention here is that I truly believe that the war in Yemen is the forgotten war. I'm pretty sure many of you here remember when the war in Syria was going on, how much coverage media was giving to the war in Syria to try to reflect what's exactly happening in Syria and give the readers a clear picture about the tragic that Syrian people were going through. Unlike the war in Yemen, I truly believe that it's not giving enough attention by media outlets, and even if they want to mention Yemen and talk about the war there, they tend to share falsified information about the war there, like trying to position it as a civil war between Yemenis, which is not the case. or understating the number of casualties there, or how people are suffering in Yemen. So there isn't. I don't feel there is a clear picture that really represents what's happening in Yemen. Anyway, so an overview about the war. So the war started over 6 years ago, and as I mentioned, it's not a civil war. This war is funded by Saudi Arabia and UAE, backed by various Western governments, including United States of America, Canada, UK, France, Germany, and various other Western governments. Obviously, there are foreign troops in Yemen. They unfortunately were able to bring mercenaries from Sudan, Colombia, Senegal, and various other countries, and including also some security companies like Blackwater, which I'm very sure that many of you have heard about it. This is the company that the US government hired when they invaded Iraq back in 2004. Now, talking about the situation in Yemen, and starting with the humanitarian crisis, many of you, I'm very sure, heard about a UN report that came out and mentioned that Yemen is the worst humanitarian crisis in the past 100 years. Also, another report came out 2 months ago from the World Food Program, and they mentioned that every 75 seconds, a child in Yemen dies because they don't have access to food or clean water. Can you imagine that a family would lose a child every 75 seconds because they're helpless about providing their children with food and water? How much grief and sadness they have to go through every day. This is very unfortunate, and this is something that, if it was somewhere else other than Yemen, it would have been highlighted by media and given way much more attention. Back to other stats, so over 8 million children are out of school. That's almost over 60% of the children of Yemen are out of school for the past 6 years. These children are not given the opportunity to live a normal life like other children around the world. And when we're speaking about the main reasons for this humanitarian crisis, the first thing that really contributes to this is the blockade imposed by Saudi Arabia and United States on the airports and ports of Yemen. Food and oil ships barely enters into Yemen, although they have permits from the United Nations saying that they don't have any arms or weapons that will be smuggled into Yemen. Yet, Yemeni people find it very hard and almost impossible to get food and oil ships into Yemen. This has contributed a lot to the worst humanitarian crisis as described by the United Nations. Now, we're speaking about the consequences of this on healthcare and other aspects. Almost 50% of the hospitals in Yemen are out of service because they don't have access to energy, and the other 50% is bombed and targeted by the Saudi jets, which are bought from Western countries, as you all know. Also, the blockade has really contributed a lot to the suffering of people when they're trying to travel in and out of Yemen. I remember in 2016 when I visited my family in Yemen. Usually used to take me, before the war started, 16 to 20 hours to get to Yemen. Now it would take me over 37 hours traveling from Canada to Yemen. And you can imagine how much, suffering and really like hard time just going from one airplane to another and then going by a car for almost like 15 hours from one city to another, try to catch your flight. Now, I would like to also highlight some of the war crimes that have been committed by the Saudi-US collision in Yemen. Some of these incidents are very famous, and I'm sure you might have heard of them. For example, bombing a bus in Sada, which is a province in the north of Yemen, where 80 children were killed. And US and Saudi Arabia, they claimed that it was a military site. Another very unfortunate incident is bombing a funeral in Sana'a, the capital city. And I was really personally affected by this because I lost my neighbor. Can you imagine that they bombed the funeral where 800 people were present there? 150 of them died, unfortunately, including my neighbor. And the rest were severely injured. And I'm pretty sure most of them have lost their lives because their injuries was very, very severe. They also have bombed weddings in several cities. And you can imagine, like, at least in a wedding, over 100 people will be present. And they've done this several times. It's not one or two times. Like, they've done it in various cities like Sana'a, the capital city, Hajjah, Saada, Amran, various cities. And this happens on, I would say, on regular basis. Like, it's not a one or two time thing that happens. No, it's something that happens on a regular in Yemen. Also, they've bombed markets, and I'm talking about markets where hundreds of people were there. There is a very famous incident that happened in Hajjah province where 97 people were present in a market, and they were all killed, including 29 children. When speaking about these incidents, it feels easy to me to just mention numbers and talk about how much people are suffering. But when you go through these incidents and live the experience, it's very, very hard. I remember in 2016 when I was visiting my family, one day I was just sitting in the living room, and suddenly I heard a very abnormal explosion. It was very loud to a point where I felt that I lost my senses, and I just lost control over my body. 3 seconds later, all the windows around me were blown away. Now, still I was nailed to the couch that I was sitting on. I literally could not move or take action. But then my nieces and nephews, they started running down, and they were very, very scared and frightened. And they started hugging me, trying to hide behind my back. And that's when I realized that, okay, something is wrong here, and I need to take them to the room next to the living room. And I kid you not, for almost a minute, I lost the ability of speaking. It was out of this world. Like, no matter how much I talk about it, I will never be able to explain what happened that day. And this incident is no way close to the previous incidents that I mentioned. But it's very hard. It's very hard to be there and live through these experiences, and they definitely leave a mark on you that will stay with you for the rest of your life. And because of this, after this, I discovered that it was a bomb that was dropped almost 3 kilometers away from my place. And 3 kilometers, to be honest with you, it's not like really close to you, but still, like, I had to go. Like, I went through this experience, although I wasn't very, very close to the site that was bombed. So you can imagine if you were very close to that site, like, you would have to go through like some really abnormal and out of this world experience. And because of this, I know a lot of children who have lost their ability to speak, to listen, and even to go to school. It's very immense. The suffer is very immense here in Yemen, and really people in Yemen are going through a lot. And the world is not even listening to the people of Yemen and really realize how much they're suffering. Sorry, 1 second. Anyway, so the last thing I want to talk about is, the involvement of the Canadian government and the rest of Western government, excuse me. Definitely all the weapons and arms that are used in Yemen They're being supplied by Western countries, including Canada, and especially Canada. It's very obvious that the arms that they're selling to Saudi Arabia are used in this war, and they're hugely contributing to the suffering of Yemeni people. And this has been covered by various Canadian media outlets. Yet the Canadian government refuses to stop exporting arms to Saudi Arabia. Also, the blockade that is imposed on Yemen. Saudi Arabia cannot impose this type of blockade without having the support of these Western countries and the United Nations. So, what I want to say is that they're definitely all complicit in war crimes in Yemen, and I'm very, very happy to see that a lot of people are here present with us today and listening to us. And special thanks really to Rachel Small for all her support, and I'm hoping to get to know each and everyone here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamza. Very well said. Would like to invite Daniel and Bianca and Hamza to join me and see if we can answer a few questions in the minutes we have left. There's Daniel, and invite Hamza to come right back, and Bianca as well. Daniel, if we could start with one or two of the questions addressed to you. What percentage, someone asked, of minerals in the world are for militarism? And if I can give you two questions, what is the best thing, very concisely, briefly, that people can do in a country like Canada or another country to stop the mining that their country and their country's companies are doing abroad?
Yeah, I'll try to answer these succinctly. Really good questions. Thank you for asking them. In terms of the percentage of minerals that go to the sort of war machine, it's something that we were trying to find out for this report, but was very, very difficult because the arms companies all kind of deny or use confidentiality, or commercial confidentiality as reasons why they can't give that information. And when we speak to the mining companies, they all say, well, we don't know where our minerals go to. That's further up the supply chain, so they don't give us figures for that. But what we did manage to find out is that it's estimated that the Pentagon consumes about 750,000 tons of minerals a year. So if we scaled that up based on US military spending, that would be about 2 million tons of minerals that go to military spending. And even though that would be quite a small fraction of what is estimated to be a global material consumption of around 100 billion tons a year, it's important to note that with minerals, even just getting 1 ounce of gold extracted from the earth is usually going to result in about 79 tons of waste, just because of the amount of arsenic or mercury that you're going to need to kind of separate the metal from the ore. So even though it's quite a small fraction of global material consumption, it's still going to leave a massive kind of impact on the environment and on communities. The second question, I know that there's a really good organization in Canada that London Mining Network works with called Mining Watch Canada. And I think that might be an organization that people in Canada might want to look at, and the work that they do to support mining affected communities. For us, as our principle at London Mining Network, we always think it's important to take leadership from the community by mining, and their demands will often be different. Some of them will want mining to end completely or to stop mining from going ahead, but others will want a more safely regulated form of mining to take place, or to have some kind of ownership or better royalties from the mining project itself. So I guess it's about creating those links with mining affected communities and drawing these links as well between the anti-war and peace movements and the movements that are trying to get for climate justice, that are trying to support mining affected communities as well.
Very well said, Daniel. Let me try a couple of questions to Bianca. How can people and groups that are working against mining for militarism and weapons shows and wars work together better with environmentalist groups? And secondly, with various new weapons, directed energy weapons and cyber attacks and so forth, do we need to shift from trying to ban particular weapons to trying to ban wars?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Those are really interesting questions. So maybe I'll address the second one first. So, I think that, when it comes to the question of, should we ban resource wars as opposed to fighting development of individual weapons, I think that really these are both important. I don't think that it is an either or. I think that the more weapons that we have in production, the more that they are supported, and it just tends to drive more wars. And I think that cyber threats are certainly a concern. I mean, I think this is something that we're learning more and more about. But what we do know for sure is that we've seen the impacts of bombings. When you look at Libya, for instance, right, and the impact of NATO bombings, and you see the just unbelievable extent of damage to the great man-made aquifer system. That's a source of 70% of the country's water from these bombings. It just becomes very clear that that's not something that we can be ignoring when we know things like the fact that tens of millions of people could die instantaneously if nuclear weapons were exploded over cities, and that the use of even a fraction of the more than 13,000 nuclear weapons that we have in the world could imperil billions of people in global famine and through radioactive fallout. So it's definitely not a question of one or the other. And I think that when it comes to different struggles for social justice and working together, I mean, I think that part of what we have to do is to dig deeper, essentially, and to see that the same systems that are creating inequality, systems of greed, systems that externalize costs onto the environment, systems of extraction that put profit over people, these systems that benefit very, very few, they are the same systems, right? When we're talking about war, when we're talking about the climate, it's dollars that have been benefited, and very, very few human beings are benefiting. So I think that it's really important for people to get to the root causes and to bust out of their silos, right? We're more powerful when we do that, and we're more powerful when we bring people to our struggles who have the most to gain as well from understanding and taking down these systems, right? I think that we're all, to a certain extent, I think most people are sick of systems of domination, right? And I think that we do have a bit of a narrative crisis. We definitely need some grander visions, right, that are able to help us, connect the dots between different struggles for social justice. And I think part of this is just we need to expand our imaginations. I think they've been trashed by the neoliberal project. But I think that when we look our crises in the eye, we see that they're very much connected and that they overlap, and that we do need a plan that addresses all of them. So.
Absolutely, we do. Hamza, are you still with us?
Yes.
Great. Let me see if I can address a couple of questions to you. And first of all, to say that I'm extremely sorry for what you've been through and recounted, and a number of people in the chat have expressed that same sentiment. One question that's been asked is, what are the motivations of Saudi Arabia and perhaps of its allies in this horrific war? And another question related to what you started with. you know, we do see some media coverage when people on this call do protests blocking weapons for Saudi Arabia in Canada, and we see the bombing of the school bus. But I think we've seen more of Palestinian victims in recent days. Children on the front page of the New York Times. How can we help around the world to get more voice for people in Yemen, and photos and videos from people in Yemen?
Sure. So these are really good questions. So regarding the first question, there is a bit of history there. So for almost the past 100 years, Saudi Arabia have been, you know, controlling the decision-making process in Yemen, and they've always, you know, seen Yemen as the backyard for Saudi Arabia. In 2014, there was a revolution, and the government that was installed by Saudi Arabia was overthrown. And you know, when Saudi Arabia realized that they've lost control over Yemen, they launched this war. This is the short answer. Now, definitely, you know, if I want to really explain everything about it, will take hours maybe. Now, regarding the second question, you know, since the war started, I believe over time we've seen, you know, more coverage definitely for Yemen, but still, it's not, you know, does not live to the you know, to the required attention that Yemen deserves. I can't really think of you know, outlets right now that I would really follow, especially when it comes to Western media outlets. But I'll definitely you know, find someone and definitely share it with Rachel, and maybe then she can help me share it with the rest. David, I think you're on mute.
I think you're muted, David.
Sorry. I want to thank Daniel and Bianca and Hamza for their terrific remarks, and we will be following up and continuing the conversation with a lot of people in the chat. But we have a break of 10 minutes coming up, during which everyone can go to an expo booth. Click on Expo at the left, or go to networking and meet other people. You click on networking over at the left side of your screen. And in 10 minutes at 6:00 p.m. Eastern time, my time, and whatever time that is where you all are, we will be having sessions, discussion sessions, where people will be able to participate beyond just in the chat, sharing video and audio. And you get to them by clicking on sessions on the left-hand side of your screen. In 10 minutes time from now, there will be 10 sessions live simultaneously, and you can pick one. You can spend some time in one and switch to another. You can find all the details about them in the program that's linked in a recent email you all received, and on the No War 2021 website, and you'll see descriptions of each session when you go to the sessions tab in 10 minutes. So absolutely wonderful job by Daniel and Bianca and Hamza, and thank you to Rachel and Greta, and thank you to all of you, and see you all in 10 minutes.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.